Why have you tried to shut up Denise? Why have you threatened her with lawsuits?
Jonathan.
Why? I want to know.
Stop.
What does Denise know that's so incriminating to
She
you?
doesn't know anything. She doesn't know anything.
Heartbreaking news. Joni Lamb, the beloved face of Daystar, is selling everything. And it's all connected to shocking revelations. Denis Boggs, a close insider, has uncovered explosive secrets about Joanie Lamb that will leave you speechless. What led to this drastic decision, and why is Joni letting go of everything she once held dear? The truth behind it all is more shocking than you can imagine. Stay tuned for the full story that could change everything. The scandal surrounding Joni Lamb began with what seemed like a typical story of love and faith. Joni, a well-known figure in the Christian community, had always presented herself as a devoted, selfless person, committed to her ministry and her family. She was widely admired for her work and her public persona, especially her relationship with her late husband, Marcus Lamb. But things started to take a turn when reports and an explosive audio recording began to paint a very different picture. In the recording, Joanie's true character seemed to come to light. She was no longer the woman people had known from the television screen, the one who smiled and preached about faith and integrity. The Joanie in that recording was a stark contrast, revealing a side of her that many had never seen before. Her private life seemed to be filled with contradictions, with her actions not matching the image she had built for herself. It became clear that there was much more going on behind the scenes than the public had been led to believe. As the scandal unraveled, it was revealed that Joanie had been living a much more extravagant lifestyle than anyone had imagined. While her ministry relied heavily on donations from supporters, she had been spending a significant portion of that money on herself. The luxurious houses, the expensive possessions, it was all paid for by the very people who trusted her. This was a shocking revelation for those who had been supporting her, believing that their contributions were being used to further the cause of faith, not to fund a lavish lifestyle. The more people learned about Joanie's personal choices, the more the gap between her public image and her private life became apparent. The question on everyone's mind was, how could someone who called themselves a Christian leader behave this way? This scandal wasn't just about personal failure. It shook the very foundation of what many people believed in. Joanie's actions raised doubts about the integrity of not just her, but the entire ministry she represented. What was most troubling, however, was the speed at which Joanie seemed to move on from her marriage to Marcus after his death. It didn't take long for her to fall in love with someone new, Doug Weiss, a man who was, in many ways, the polar opposite of Marcus. The transition was so swift that many people began to question Joanie's true motivations. Was she grieving Marcus's death? Or was she already focused on her future with someone else? This sudden change in her life only added to the growing sense of betrayal felt by those who had once viewed her as a role model. As the scandal continued to unfold, it became clear that Joanie's actions were not only personal, but deeply intertwined with the future of the ministry she was once a part of. The revelations surrounding her behavior and choices left many wondering if the woman they had once admired could ever regain the trust she had lost.
You said this, Miss Denise. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He is of no caliber for such a high platform. He is being used by the enemy to take Daystar down.
The sale of the Poppy House marked a turning point in the scandal surrounding Joanie Lamb. To understand the full significance of this sale, it's essential to understand what the Poppy House represented. The Poppy House wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was a deeply symbolic project that had been close to the heart of Joanie's late husband, Marcus Lamb. Before his death, Marcus had envisioned the Poppy House as a sanctuary, a place where troubled ministers and pastors could come to rest, heal, and find guidance. He saw it as a haven for those who were struggling with the pressures of ministry, a place where they could recover emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Marcus had put his heart and soul into this project. It wasn't just another investment. It was a dream. For years, he had watched so many people in ministry fall apart under the weight of stress, loneliness, and burnout. He wanted the Poppy House to be a refuge for them, a space where they could step away from the pressures of their roles and find peace. Marcus had a deep understanding of the toll that ministry could take on a person's mental health, and the Poppy House was his way of offering something different, a place of recovery rather than just work. He believed that the house could be a symbol of healing, a project that would serve the ministry long after he was gone. But Marcus's vision for the Poppy House was never realized the way he had hoped. Shortly after his death, Joanie Lamb, his widow, made the decision to sell it. The sale of the Poppy House raised eyebrows for several reasons. For one, it came so soon after Marcus's death, which left many wondering about Joanie's true motivations. Why sell a project that had been so important to Marcus? Why let go of something that was meant to carry on his legacy? When the house was put on the market, it quickly became apparent that the sale was not just a simple decision based on financial need. The Poppy House was sold for $1,250,000, which was significantly less than its original asking price of $1,650,000. The price drop was striking, but the true issue wasn't the price. It was the reasoning behind the sale. According to sources close to the situation, Joanie's decision to sell the house wasn't about the ministry no longer needing it, as she had claimed. It wasn't even about financial hardship. Instead, it seemed that the sale was more personal, more about Joanie's desire to distance herself from the legacy of Marcus, her late husband, and from the ministry they had built together. It became clear that the sale of the Poppy House was not just a financial transaction. It was symbolic of a deeper break from the past. It was as if Joanie was attempting to sever the last ties to Marcus's vision, to erase something that he had worked so hard to create. The Poppy House wasn't just a house. It was a reflection of Marcus's values, his care for those in ministry, and his belief in second chances. By selling it so quickly after his passing, Joni was making a statement about her own priorities and what she saw as the future of the ministry. The timing of the sale also added to the controversy. It happened shortly after Joanie married Doug Weiss, which raised further questions about her motives. Some saw it as a way to shift the focus of the ministry from Marcus's vision to her new relationship and her future with Doug. The fact that the Poppy House, a symbol of Marcus's work and legacy, was sold almost immediately after she remarried felt like a rejection of everything he had stood for. But what made the sale even more troubling was the personal nature of the decision. According to several sources, Joanie's reasons for selling the house were not purely financial. It seemed as though there was a deeper, more personal motive behind the sale, one rooted in her relationship with Denise Boggs, a key figure in the Lamb family's ministry. Denise had been a trusted advisor and consultant to Marcus and Joanie, and she had been one of the few people to call out the cracks in the ministry before the scandal broke. Denise had warned Joanie about the dangers of her relationship with Doug Weiss, and the two had fallen out over their differing views. Some suggested that the sale of the Poppy House was a way for Joanie to lash out at Denise, to erase the legacy that Denise had helped build with Marcus. It was as though the sale of the house was a way for Joanie to take control of her own narrative, to rewrite the story of her life and her ministry. By selling the Poppy House, Joanie was making a statement about her independence, her break from the past, and her new future with Doug. For many, this was seen as a betrayal of Marcus's memory, a betrayal of the dream he had worked so hard to bring to life. But for Joni, it was a way to move forward, to start fresh, and to distance herself from the painful memories of the past. The sale of the Poppy House also highlighted the broader financial issues within the ministry. As the details of the sale emerged, it became clear that Joanie's financial decisions were not always in line with the values she had professed. The lavish lifestyle she was leading, funded in part by the donations of her supporters, raised questions about how the ministry's funds were being used. The fact that she had sold a project like the Poppy House for personal reasons rather than for the benefit of the ministry only added fuel to the fire. Many began to see the sale as part of a pattern of questionable financial decisions that reflected a deeper moral failure within the ministry. In the end, the sale of the Poppy House became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong within the Lamb family's ministry. It was more than just a real estate transaction. It was the turning point in a scandal that would rock the Christian community to its core. The Poppy House, once a symbol of hope and healing, had become a casualty of Joanie's personal choices and her desire to move on from the past, and in doing so, it became a tragic reminder of how far things had fallen since Marcus Lamb's original vision.
I voiced my concerns to Joni about Doug at the very beginning when they first started dating, but she refused to hear me and defended him. This was when I became alarmed, and I knew she had come under a spirit of deception. The things I warned her about were things that she once voiced strong convictions about. When a person is under a spirit of deception, they begin to change right before your eyes, and it's as if you don't know them anymore. They say things they would never have said before. This is why I want to voice my concerns for Daystar. This is an attack against Daystar.
Yes, yes, and we see it now, don't we?
Yes, we do, ma'am. My perspective
Amen.
of Doug came after spending several days with him. I voiced to her that the issues in the first marriage needed to be confronted before going into this marriage. Your mom agreed that they would hear me out at first, but once Jimmy Evans fully approved of Doug, she told me that they would not be interested in talking with me. Did this sever the relationship between you and Joni Lamb?
Yeah, it was over. Yeah, it was over then, yes.
The tension between Joanie Lamb and Denise Boggs began long before the public scandal erupted. Their relationship, once built on mutual respect and shared goals within the ministry, quickly became strained due to Joanie's personal decisions and the influence of Doug Weiss, Joanie's new husband. At the heart of their falling out was a deep-seated disagreement about Doug's character, his suitability for leadership, and Joanie's blind defense of him despite the warnings from those who cared about her. It all started when Denise, a longtime consultant and trusted advisor within the ministry, began to notice troubling signs in Joanie's relationship with Doug. Denise had spent years working with the Lamb family, offering guidance and support, especially to Marcus, who had always valued her counsel. She had seen firsthand how the pressures of ministry could affect a person's personal life, and she had always been committed to helping those in the ministry avoid the pitfalls she had witnessed time and time again. So when Joanie's relationship with Doug became more serious, Denise became concerned. She had a unique vantage point, having spent time talking to both Doug and his wife Lisa, and she began to see patterns of behavior in Doug that made her uncomfortable. Denise, ever the loyal friend and advisor, felt it was her duty to warn Joanie. She approached Joanie with her concerns about Doug, specifically his history and his temperament. Denise had observed that Doug seemed to have unresolved emotional issues that could negatively affect not only his marriage, but also his ability to lead in the ministry. She had witnessed firsthand his interactions with Lisa, and it was clear that their relationship was fraught with tension and conflict. To Denise, it wasn't just about the personal dynamics between Doug and Lisa. It was about the potential damage that his emotional baggage could cause within the ministry. Denise was worried that Doug wasn't the kind of leader the ministry needed, someone who could guide and inspire others in their faith. Instead, she feared he was someone who would manipulate situations for his own benefit, much like the wolf in sheep's clothing that she later called him. But when Denise approached Joanie to share her concerns, her warnings were met with resistance. Joanie, who had been swept off her feet by Doug, refused to listen. She was adamant that Doug was the right man for her and for the ministry. At this point, Joanie had already fallen deeply in love with Doug, and no one, not even someone as respected as Denise, was going to change her mind. Denise's attempt to intervene was not well received, and Joanie's protective instincts kicked in. She felt as though Denise was attacking her personal happiness, and instead of considering the possibility that Denise might have valid concerns, Joanie pushed her away. She became defensive and dismissive of Denise's warnings, seeing them as nothing more than an unwelcome intrusion into her life. The tension only escalated from there. As Joanie became more entrenched in her relationship with Doug, the divide between her and Denise grew wider. Joanie's trust in Doug seemed to blind her to the deeper issues that Denise had identified. Denise, on the other hand, began to feel increasingly alienated. She had been a trusted friend, someone who had always had Joanie's best interest at heart, but now she was being cast aside, her opinions ignored, and her concerns dismissed. What had once been a close, supportive friendship was now a distant, fractured relationship. As Joanie and Doug's relationship progressed, it became clear that Denise's warnings were not just about Doug's past, they were also about the future of the ministry. Joanie's decision to marry Doug and integrate him into the leadership of the ministry was seen by Denise as a reckless move, one that would bring chaos rather than stability. Denise was worried that Doug, with his unresolved issues and aggressive behavior, would destroy the integrity of the ministry. She felt that Joanie, by marrying Doug, was putting her personal desires above the greater good of the ministry, and this was something Denise could not condone. The final straw came when Joanie's decision to marry Doug became public, and Denise felt that Joanie had betrayed not only her, but also the very principles they had once shared. Joanie had always presented herself as a strong, principled leader who cared deeply for the welfare of others. But Denise now saw someone who was being swept away by her emotions, someone who was no longer thinking rationally or objectively. Joanie's rejection of Denise's advice felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked for together. It was as if Joanie had chosen Doug over her friends, over the ministry, and over the values that had once united them. Denise, feeling hurt and rejected, pulled away completely. The distance between them grew wider, and soon, their relationship became little more than a distant memory. What had once been a partnership built on trust and shared goals was now a bitter rivalry, and it seemed like there was no turning back. Denise, who had always been loyal to Joanie and the Lamb family, now felt like an outsider. She could no longer be a part of a ministry that she felt was headed in the wrong direction, especially with Doug in such a prominent role. But the tension didn't end there. Joanie's relationship with Doug began to reveal deeper issues within the ministry, particularly in terms of financial decisions and the handling of donations. Denise, who had been a staunch advocate for transparency and accountability, found herself once again at odds with Joanie. The ministry's financial troubles, combined with Joanie's lavish lifestyle, were the topics that fueled their ongoing conflict. Denise had always believed that the money donated by supporters should be used responsibly. But Joanie's spending habits raised red flags for Denise. She was disturbed by the way Joanie was using the ministry's funds for personal gain, including buying expensive houses and living a life that seemed out of touch with the mission they had once shared. The more Denise spoke out about the problems she saw, the more Joanie distanced herself. It wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It had become a full-blown feud. Joanie refused to listen to Denise's concerns, and Denise, feeling betrayed and ignored, continued to speak out, hoping that someone would listen. As the tension mounted, Denise's role in the ministry became untenable. She couldn't continue to work with someone she felt was morally compromised, and Joanie, for her part, couldn't continue to work with someone who was openly critical of her decisions. In the end, the breakdown of their relationship was a reflection of the larger issues within the ministry and the Lamb family. What had started as a small disagreement over Doug Weiss grew into a full-scale conflict that exposed the deep divisions within the leadership. Denise's departure from the ministry was inevitable, but it also signaled the end of an era for Joanie. The ministry that Marcus had built, one that was meant to be a beacon of integrity and hope, had become something entirely different. And at the heart of the conflict were two women, once close friends, now torn apart by their differing visions for the future. The fallout from this tension didn't just affect Joanie and Denise, it rippled through the entire ministry. Followers and supporters of the Lamb family were left to pick up the pieces, wondering where the truth lay and whether the ministry they had supported was still the same. The rupture between Joanie and Denise was a symbol of a larger breakdown in trust, and it left many questioning the future of the Lamb legacy. For Joanie, it was a painful personal conflict that she would never be able to undo. And for Denise, it was a betrayal that would forever alter her view of the ministry and the people she had once worked with. The risks of manipulation and corruption in ministry are a deeply troubling issue that has plagued many religious organizations, and the situation surrounding Joanie Lamb and the ministry she was once a part of is a stark example of how power and influence can be misused for personal gain. What began as a faith-based initiative quickly became a vehicle for greed and control, as leaders began to prioritize wealth and personal comfort over the values they once preached about. As the scandal unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the ministry, originally built on principles of charity and spiritual guidance, was instead being driven by a different set of values: money, status, and the desire for control. In the case of Joanie Lamb and her leadership within the ministry, the manipulation began subtly but grew more apparent over time. Joanie's public persona was one of humility, dedication to the ministry, and a strong faith in God. However, behind the scenes, things were not as they seemed. As the ministry began to grow, so did the financial resources it attracted. Donations from supporters poured in, with people believing their contributions were being used for good, to help spread the word of God and to support those in need. But as the donations increased, so did Joanie's personal lifestyle, which began to stray far from the humble beginnings of the ministry. Joanie Lamb was not alone in her manipulation. Doug Weiss, her new husband, was also deeply involved in the decisions that were steering the ministry in the wrong direction. The couple's lavish lifestyle, funded in part by the ministry's donations, began to raise red flags. Expensive homes, cars, and vacations, all paid for with money that was intended for the work of God, soon became a point of contention. It was clear that the couple had adopted an extravagant way of living, which was in stark contrast to the message they were supposed to be spreading. Joanie, once admired for her commitment to helping others, now seemed more concerned with accumulating wealth and enjoying the comforts of life. The ministry had, in many ways, become a means to support her personal desires. This was not an isolated issue. It was part of a larger pattern of financial mismanagement and lack of transparency. Donations were flowing in, but where was the money really going? The supporters, who had trusted Joni and her leadership, began to question the integrity of the ministry. They had been led to believe that their money would be used to support the work of the church, to help others in need, and to further the teachings of Christianity. Instead, they found themselves funding a lifestyle of luxury and excess for the leaders of the ministry. There was no accountability for how the funds were being spent, and the lack of transparency only made things worse. This kind of manipulation is especially dangerous because it erodes the trust between religious leaders and their followers. When a leader uses their position to enrich themselves at the expense of the very people who have placed their faith in them, it causes a deep fracture in the community. Followers who had once believed in the ministry's mission now felt betrayed. The money they had given in good faith was being used for personal indulgence rather than for the greater good. This sense of betrayal is even more profound when the leaders involved are held to a higher moral standard due to their religious positions. People expect their spiritual leaders to be examples of integrity, honesty, and humility, not figures who manipulate the system for personal gain. One of the most troubling aspects of the situation was how those in power manipulated the narrative to cover up their actions. Joanie and Doug Weiss worked hard to maintain a facade of integrity, but as the pressure grew, cracks began to show. They deflected questions and tried to control the conversation, often silencing those who dared to speak out. Critics were labeled as enemies or troublemakers, and anyone who questioned the use of the ministry's funds was dismissed. This strategy of intimidation only served to deepen the divide between the leadership and the congregation.